Yeah, that's a great question. Quite frankly, it's one that I go to therapy for, right? Because it's
Well,
one where, right?
You're listening to the AV Amplifier. Each week, we'll feature voices and ideas that need to be amplified in the higher education and pro AV IT communities. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. And now here's your host, Ryan Gray.
well, hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again to the AV Amplifier. As always, I am Ryan Gray, and I am your host. And if it is Wednesday, your feed has been refreshed with new content. I'm struggling with the intro today because it's like 7:15 my time. The sun hasn't even come up where I am yet, but there's only a certain number of people out there that I would get up this early to do a recording with, and one of them I get the pleasure to bring to you today. Dr. Campbell, would you please introduce yourself? Who are you, and what do you do?
Yes. Good morning, Ryan. I'm honored that you would wake up that early for me. So thank you. Yes, my name is Kellie Campbell. I am Chief Information Officer and Vice President of Technology for the Vermont State College System, and have had the lucky chance, Ryan, to cross paths with you among the higher ed IT professional network across our country. So thank you for having me here today. Born and raised in Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom, rural part of Vermont, and I've had the chance to live now just north of Burlington with my partner and my two littles. So appreciate the chance to be on the show with you today.
Well, thank you for taking the time. Yeah, somebody that that I've come across at a couple events and always has interesting things to say. Definitely, you're someone who you can tell has thought pretty deeply about a lot of things. And in the world of IT, we extroverts have to stick together. I sometimes refer to myself as the token extrovert of IT where I work. So I wanted to jump into a couple things, but first say thank you for taking the time because CIO and vice president of the entire state system sounds like a lot to deal with on a regular basis. So what do you, I guess let's just start this way. What does that really mean in terms of your job to be not just in charge of a campus, a college, or something, but the whole state system?
Yeah. Well, that could be a full hour of therapy. No, I love it. I love it. So, I think one thing, Ryan, you probably know about me is I am in the camp of being an extrovert as well with you, right? I love people. I love connection. I love relationships. And that's such a huge part of the job that I get to do. I actually started in the state college system in 2019 at Vermont Technical College as the chief technology officer. And not long into it, I had the chance to move to the central office, probably not for the most exciting reason. And the reason for that is because of COVID. My background is in online and educational technology. So I moved under the chancellor for a little bit during COVID to help with some of the COVID response, given my background. And then the gift that keeps giving never left. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but not long coming out of COVID did we transition into some significant change in our state around public higher education. And my position just grew from there to build an IT shared services team for the whole state. So what does that mean in my day-to-day? Well, I'll be very transparent that a lot of my work over the past 3 years has been what I would call really building the foundation of the house, going back into a lot of pieces of IT history where things were disparate, where things were underinvested, where relationships weren't maintained, where budgets weren't organized, where structures weren't in place. And a lot of that work has just been the intersection of people, technology, process, data, right? That's been like my foundational work over the past 3+ years. And I'm finally in this place, I think, as CIO, supporting kind of our whole system where I get to now build on that. We're kind of in this place where I'm getting to build on that foundation. And so, for example, supporting Vermont State University, which is a newly consolidated institution with just a lot of really exciting work as they've come together as a new institution. And the community college, which is near and dear to my heart, serving such a critical population of Vermonters. And that's a very broad network across our state. So it's leveraging the hard work I think we've put over the last 3 years. It's continuing to do that hard work. But for me, it's really about building the relationships doing projects that are very student first and impactful. And so much of my day is, I'll admit, a lot of meetings and a lot of meetings, but really intentional meetings to continue the transformation work we are doing in our state. I will end this with just saying, I think so much of the work that I'm doing right now in my position isn't even technology related, right? So much of it is about how technology can support the next generation and the work that we are doing. And to be intentional with that work, it is a lot of strategic and thoughtful conversation. So a lot of talking, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of ideation.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think to kind of expand on that one, like you hit on a couple things there to go in, but the role of what a higher ed CIO, I think, is very different today than it would have been, say, 15 or 20 years ago, at least the perception of what that needs to be, but also institution to institution, what is expected of that person or how people see that role, it varies widely, it seems like. So, you're describing a role of kind of, like you said, an executive leader, not, the chief information officer is a executive leader of the institution, not the most responsible technical person, it's like at the institution who's just put in charge of the nerd stuff or whatever. So how do you then balance sort of your need to understand technology, understand possibilities, marry those things with students, but just in general, then balancing that with the management and leadership of a large team of people?
I think for a long time in my professional career, I grew through, as I shared at the start of this, educational instructional technology into online. I kind of, quote, grew up through, actually did AV technology. That's where I really started out as a work study was, projectors and the good old AV side of IT. So connection there, Ryan, connection there. I love you AV folks. But, as I moved up through a manager position, assistant director position, associate director, CTO, CIO, VP. For a long time, I think I felt like I had to do it all to prove myself to be at the table. And I think there's a dynamic there, just maybe some of my lived experience as a woman navigating that in IT, but this need to kind of prove that I could do all the technical and I could do all the leadership, and my background and training from my master's degree really threw me into leadership that carried into my doctoral work. But what I've really come to realize, especially over the past 5 years, is that as a CIO, I am never going to be able to do it all, nor should I, right? So much of my work has really been about how do I empower others and how do I think thoughtfully about leveling up other IT leaders across the state to help do some of the work that just frankly I can't do, whether it's a skill deficit for me or whether it is just something, quite frankly, that it's not as important as somewhere else I need to spend my time. And the simple fact is no CIO is going to know every technology piece of the IT portfolio, right? Most CIOs come up through a certain side of IT and have a deep understanding of that. But by no means do you want me setting up switches and deploying access points. That wouldn't be pretty. My team would be, but no. Right. So for me, it's about getting kind of the right positions in place to help kind of cover the baseline of what we need to be doing on the technology foundation side. It's been about leveling up people in terms of their leadership, my directors especially, to really help carry forward not just the technology vision, but understand how it connects to both institutional and system strategic plans. And then my work is to kind of support all of that. Now, does it happen perfectly and beautifully? I would like to think so, but no, right? But it's really come to a place where I every day have to think about where do I need to play to be successful? And sometimes that's in the weeds. Sometimes that's with one of my teams in a really deep way. Sometimes it's stepping away from my team and spending a lot of time with leadership. Sometimes it's spending a lot of time with the state legislature. It really it differentiates every month. But my main thing is really about connecting people, connecting solutions. And I have just had to really be thoughtful of how I surround myself with really great people to help make sure that I can execute on that work. No one person can do it all. So it's really the team and the culture you create to help better our institutions and better serve our students.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of same thing, being in a role where I feel like you described, like, sometimes you need to get in the weeds on one thing in my area. There's times where I'm just working with my managers, a lot of time spent outside of my department, with stakeholders and other things. And what so this question may just be for me, whether anybody else cares about it or not. But even at that, how do you find the balance in spending time? I've kind of tried to go through things of like, okay, do I see my job as one quarter, my budgeting time, right? Or this or that, but to try and take each of those areas and because all of them require more than I have, more than I can give. And I try and very carefully make sure I'm never trying to give more than I have to give, because I'll fail at that regardless. So
exactly.
How do you look at, on whether it's on a given day, over a month, over a year, that you are applying your time in a way that serves your institution the best?
Yeah, that's a great question. Quite frankly, it's one that I go to therapy for, right? Because it's one where, right? I mean, in transparency, because I think
but listeners of this show, I have endorsed it a number of times. Again, I am I am trying to figure out how to get, has been in therapy for a long time, into all job descriptions, because otherwise I end up the therapist and I'm not a very good one. So you know what I'm saying? Like, 100%.
For sure.
Okay, please.
No, I mean, and I think that's such an important piece to talk about, because I think sometimes people feel like, oh, you have it, quote, so together. And it's like, well, I think I do, but with a lot of supports in place, right? Because I think just important to name, and this really came full circle during COVID. I was a new mom to my son during COVID, and balancing being a CTO, doing technology response around our state while like nursing my son, right? There's just this natural blend of our worlds that has happened. And so the demands on us, both personally and professionally, are significant, right? And I know many people have lived stories that they could share. That's a whole other probably discussion, but it's something, this is a really good question, because it's something I think a lot about. And I think one of my biggest strengths and one of my biggest weaknesses as a leader is, and weaknesses isn't the right term, Ryan. You get what I'm saying, but
Yeah.
it's this deep care for people, which I am a very empathetic leader. I like to meet people where they are. I like to, if somebody's struggling, I like to go, okay, let's focus on strengths and not weaknesses, etc. And as a result of that, as I think about my role, one of the reasons I think I have been so successful in able to move kind of change along in my team and in my structure is because of that empathy. Coming out of COVID and going through significant state higher ed transformation really required a lot of empathy and understanding. And with empathy and understanding comes a lot of time building relationships and spending time with people. So I referenced a few minutes ago that most of the schedule is spending time with people. And I think practically speaking, when I start each of my week, every Monday, I try to sit down and go, okay, where am I allocating my time this week? And I've just come to understand a couple of things. One, it's always going to change, and some fire is always going to take over. So I have to be agile, and I have to be nimble, and I have to be able to attend to what is most needed. And I've had to structurally look at my calendar and say, I need to ensure that I have checkpoints with my all IT, checkpoints with my directors, checkpoints with my directors and my managers, and then checkpoints with each of my teams, like my service areas. And I've had to build that into my schedule, because what I was starting to find is that some fire would take over. So I am very like, let's schedule things out type person. And then I really, at the leadership level, I think we've really had to do the same thing. Being in a statewide environment, I can't just walk down the hall and see the people that I may be used to on one campus, right? So a lot of planning into how I'm spending my time and making sure ultimately that I just have face time, even if it's not agenda driven, making sure I have face time with people. So not only in my IT organization, but also across the whole system. The last thing I'll say, just in terms of how I think I spend my time, or I try to spend my time, is connecting my work to a strategic plan. So IT didn't really have a strategic plan when I took over. And that's been something that we've done. My team has done really well over the past couple of years is said, okay, here's the institutions we support. Here's what the statewide kind of energy is in terms of legislative objectives, et cetera. Let's develop an IT plan around that. And that plan has had to guide me in terms of how I spend my time, because if I'm not connecting to those objectives and spending my time over here, not to say time over here is not valuable, but I've really had to prioritize my work and connect it to something that is, quote, documented, right? And so that's helped me to make sure that I have my eye on where I'm supposed to be going. And on the days when, I'm taking the off ramp too much, I have to make sure I'm getting back on and connecting things to a plan. And that's proved very valuable, I think, for me, but also for my team. Or at least I hope it has for them. Right.
And you're the boss, so you can say that it did.
That's right. There we go. That's right.
So, no, I think that's great. So, you talked about, working through, like you said, a statewide system and things being that way. And you mentioned at the very beginning, you were there, the gift that keeps on giving led you to a place where you had to oversee basically the consolidation of multiple IT groups into a single shared services group. And the claim that I have heard, and you can debunk it yourself if you want, is that you accomplish this without any attrition of people in the process, which seems kind of impossible to me to have that kind of change. So I imagine you're going to start, and you mentioned before, empathy being a big part of that, as you mentioned before. But when you were faced with that kind of project, could you walk us through how did you do it? How do you even begin to start something like that? And how did you set priorities in terms of, of doing it with intention?
Yeah. So this might be a long answer, so cut me off, Ryan, if I'm going too deep. But I think a lot about this because I think there's things that I look back and I would have done differently. But generally, I feel like there's so much we did right, and I try to tell my team that all of the time. I think it's important to celebrate. But yeah, so during the transformation, I'll just give a quick spiel to what transformation has been in our state, because I feel like that's important. So coming out of COVID, financially, and this is not uncommon, I think, especially for many public higher eds around our country, just the fiscal nature of the system was just not in great health, right? And so there was a situation where a previous chancellor had announced potential closure of some of our institutions. And there was pretty immense public outcry around that. And pretty quickly, we had some changeover in leadership. Pretty quickly, some close partnership with the state legislature came together and said, look, these institutions are so critical to the viability of our communities. The amount of public outcry, we knew it would come. I say we, I think the leaders knew it would come, but maybe I didn't expect how much it came. And I'm so thankful to Vermonters for really stepping in and advocating not only for students in our communities, but understanding that our institutions employ people and our institutions pay public work bills. And right, there's just so many intersections of community that wrap around our institutions. So there was a commitment in partnership with the state legislature to transform the Vermont State Colleges. And we had to do that work with some accountability, with some significant accountability, but to continue to have a physical footprint in each of our communities where institutions currently are. So we went from, I say 4 institutions, it was 3, but two of the institutions had merged not long prior. So Northern Vermont University, Vermont Technical College, and Castleton University came together to launch Vermont State University. Northern Vermont University was previously Lyndon State and Johnson State. So it really was a 4-to-1 activity. And then our community college still remaining very much a viable part of our state. And then over that was the building of shared services. So bringing together shared services to support the newly consolidated Vermont State and our community college. Okay, so a lot of work wrapped into consolidating into a Vermont State University, which could be, again, a whole other kind of discussion. But I'll focus on the IT part, given the audience here, Ryan. And, I had met with my board, and there was a pretty aggressive timeline to try to do this work. So because IT was such a backbone and pillar for helping launch and do this work. And I think if I had to simplify the transition, and yes, we were able to retain everybody through that transition. I'm very, very proud to say that. And I think so much of it was due to a couple of values that I tried to carry forward. One was to involve people. I know, as being somebody who has not always been at the leadership level, the ambiguity of what are those leaders talking about? What is the vision they're developing? You're not going to get buy-in there, right? So I had a commitment to working with my IT leadership and saying, we're going to help build this vision together. And we did significant discovery around kind of the background of like, what does IT look like across the system? How could this new structure help problem solve it? Things like deferred maintenance, things like underinvestment, things like not having enough IT staff, right? How can we build something that addresses those systemic issues, which ultimately gets IT people to buy into some vision if they know that wow, funding could become a reality in this new structure, right? So involving my leaders in kind of the design of it, but it wasn't just like, let's put pen to paper on it. It was like some strong commitment to discovery. And we used really a project management structure to help kind of discovery, design, and, implementation, et cetera. And so involving people in what that could look like. And I think the other value I really carried forward is like, look, what we're building doesn't have to be what it is forever and ever, right? Like the willingness as a leader to say, if something's not working, we'll adapt, we'll make changes, we'll improve. And not only did I have to navigate that with the IT team, but just with some leadership across the system too. And they needed some comfort and buy-in to, this is a very different service structure than we've ever thought about before. You're taking my people away from me. You're all moving them off of campuses. And this became really, this isn't about moving people, IT personnel out of communities. This isn't about taking them away from the people they have lunch with or the people they have book club with or the people they see in the hall every day. This is about their responsibility when they wake up is to continue to care about that community and all students, right? All students. And so as we started to look at service areas and the structure, it became around like not taking those pieces away that I think were so identity core for people. It became around you can still have that and you have broader accountability. And so really trying to kind of give that to people, but increase the accountability was a piece of it. This willingness to adapt if things did not work, and this willingness to really involve people right down to the org chart, to be blunt, and working very closely to help people understand where pieces of the staffing puzzle could go. So, I mean, that's, there's a lot more detail, Ryan, I could give, but I think it really speaks to, I think, the critical role that I'm seeing CIOs needing to play right now is just this change culture perspective. And I think we're used to change because IT is change, right? But it's this piece of how do we help create a new vision? And the way we were able to do that in terms of the IT consolidation was, I think, some of those values I spoke about. And I'll just wrap it up by saying this. We're now in January, 2 full years into being a new IT shared services team. And, my team talks a lot about this need to continue changing. Those values I talked about still carry today. I like to say that 2 years into shared services, we've, quote, figured it out. We've done a lot of work and I'm so proud of my team, but we're still adapting and making changes every day. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to stay, as a new kind of team and get the support we've gotten is because we're willing to continue to make things better. And that, I think, is just so important to make sure that we're doing our work with real intention.
Yeah. I love the message of being values driven. So, because that's applicable in a lot of things, right? The thing that carries you through change or chaos, personal, professional, all that is having that kind of core sense of what's important and even like a shared vision of what's important helps people when there's conflict sort of come through and at least be on the same page. So with that experience of that level of change for folks out there that are, in an IT department that maybe is being told they need to change, is in some kind of transition where people are struggling with it, or the big thing is people who, when change becomes scary, cling to this is the way we've always done it, or cling to like comfort and security and the things that are known. How would you talk to people who are maybe, if maybe they can't be in charge of the entire change of an organization, but they have to find their way in it? What are the sorts of things you saw your people do, or you would encourage people to keep in mind if they feel like their world is changing around them?
Yeah. That's a great, I mean, the psychology of this is just so deep, right? And I think I'll answer it through two lenses. I mean, I think, my leadership team, one of the things that I tried to do in terms of our accountability for thinking differently, like getting my leadership team in partnership with me, right, to think differently about what we were building. One, leading with the values, as you just emphasized, was so important because with all of the uncertainty, people always knew they were going to get transparency from me. They knew they were going to get honesty. They knew, right, as much as I reasonably could, right, with some understanding that, there's politics and everything that we do, unfortunately, right? But it gave it gave my leadership team a chance to say, like, let's look at our service catalog. There's so many things that we've just always done. Do people really want us doing those things, right? Like, I think IT sometimes can be really good at delivering services the way we think we want to deliver services. We think Ryan needs this service. We think this is what he needs to thrive as a student. Yeah, when's the last time you asked students, or when's the last time you asked staff or faculty, is this working for you? And so challenging my leadership team to say, we need to, let's document the service catalog. What stays, what goes, what comes in. Documenting things through service level agreements, like thinking about how we deliver those services. What are the quality of those services? Documenting, no joke, Ryan, every IT dollar spent across the system from an accountability perspective. Are those dollars going to the right place? And those at the leadership level became places where we had to change because it was the right thing to do, right? And once my leadership team started to see those things, it was like, okay, we understand why we're doing some of this because it doesn't make sense, right? And I think then sharing some of that with our teams became really important because I think for folks who were, flow on the ground, people on the team dealing with our users every day, of course their experience is very different. And what they're holding on to, and many of them are holding on to, is this desire to, quite frankly, their intentions of resistance, where there was resistance, was all goodwill. It was to continue to make sure that students were supported, to make sure that our communities were supported. And so it became a lot of conversation around, well, we can still do that right? And I think it was accountability on my part and our leadership's part to really sell it to our teams. And I think I referenced this a few minutes ago, but one of the themes that I heard pretty clearly, and this is probably not uncommon, especially for some of my maybe lower invested in public higher education friends in the IT world, just like not enough resources and dollars to do everything right. Years of deferred maintenance, years of underinvestment. And that was the reality for some of our system.
Yeah.
And so it was helping paint a picture that by changing these pieces, right, this is how you benefit, and trying to connect them to the vision and the problem solving. Did it work for everybody? I don't know. If you were to have some of my team on the show, maybe not. But I think where
we've got them
people
all lined up next week.
You got them lined perfect.
Yeah,
Good.
Yeah, no problem.
I can't wait to listen in and hear when they challenge everything I've said, right? But this intention of like engaging them where they want it to be, and then quite frankly, others, there were moments, Ryan, where I just had to say, I just need you to trust me.
Yeah.
Right. And here's why I'm asking you to trust me. And I do think for some folks who are really hesitant, that trust piece and that relationship piece we talked about at the beginning was so important. I think the last thing I'll say around this is, my background in leadership with leadership and project and change management, I think allowed me to facilitate a lot of this conversation. And I think for anyone listening, I've had some of my CIO colleagues be like, that's not me, Kellie. I have a very different skill set. And so I think it's, and that's fine, right? I had to augment people in other ways around me where my deficits were. And so I think as IT leaders, if this is very overwhelming to think about, first of all, steps, break it down into steps, right?
Yeah.
Keep it people-centric and people-focused. And if you need outside facilitation on this, don't be afraid to get it. There's a lot of colleagues, I think, in the higher ed IT space where people who do strategic planning, people who do change and project management, don't be afraid to ask for help because, this is really complex work that we're trying to navigate right now. And you need to be able to do that work in community. And as a CIO or as a leader doing that work, identify where your weaknesses are and bring people to the table. But as long as I think you're keeping it people-centric and outcome-driven with real intention, you'll get there, right? Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect, but with real values and real intention, I think you can make strides of change.
When I love that the message of, if people centric, you keep students first, have those values, and know that, the first isn't the last. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Don't fall into that slippery slope. Let's get done what we can done, and then we'll iterate and take the next step from there. So that's great advice for people, moving through what feels like turbulent change.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's my team probably is so sick of hearing me say this, but I use this mantra a lot. And I should credit this to actually one of my CIOs I worked for in Vermont. But he used to say all of the time, and I'm not going to get the phrase perfect, but, work to good while you work to great, right? Like be willing to be okay that good is enough right now and great is coming. And I think as we were building so much of this, sometimes people wanted perfection. Like this has to be the way that we're going to do this, and it has to be perfect. And the simple fact is that perfection, first of all, is never going to be. And some state of perfect will come if you continue to make it a priority. So some of it was just taking chance on some things and being willing to say, this is better than where we are today. And we're going to let that be our step forward while we continue to work towards great. So the whole good, great analogy, my team is probably like Kellie enough, but it's true. It's we can't get stagnant and we can't not move because of this fear of perfection, right? We can still deliver really good services and then continue to improve those services, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was also.
If your team knows it, that means, it's been a consistent message, right? That's one of those things that if the team goes, yeah, we've heard it, but that means it's there. It wasn't just something said once and whatever. So that shows that sort of consistency needed.
Right.
Cool. Well, man, a half hour goes by so fast. Thank you so much for talking through these things. I like I said, I think your voice in leadership through change and some of the things you've been able to do and leading through people is a much needed message. So thank you for taking the time. If people wanted to find you or reach out or get connected to you, how would they do that?
Yeah, that's well, first of all, just thank you, Ryan, for creating the platform. And I think it's so important right now that it can be lonely in our positions at times and trying to figure out how to navigate it. So I appreciate the community. I appreciate the opportunity and, look forward to learning from others as well. I am on, of course, LinkedIn. So happy to connect on LinkedIn with folks. Also happy to share my email if that's okay, Ryan.
Please.
It's not too secretive here. It's my name, K, and then my last name, Campbell, at vsc.edu, Vermont State Colleges. So vsc.edu. And I'd love to connect with folks and collaborate. This is, I think, problem solving and trying to innovate for the future is something that we have to do in broad community. So commending all my colleagues and peers out there that are trying to navigate the same challenges. So thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for listening to the AV-IT Amplifier. Tune in next week for more with today's guest. It'll be great or your money back. Your host has been Ryan Gray. He's on the tweeters at Ryan_A_Gray or find him on LinkedIn to connect. Please subscribe and give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. The views expressed here are not necessarily those of our respective institutions, employers, or sponsors. Everyone hang in there, go easy, and we'll be back next week.